Bush Center. We have a wonderful opportunity to present for you today. I'm Sally McDonough. I am the Vice President of External Affairs, and it's not every day that I get to talk to you about baseball and have so many sports reporters, so welcome. We have the opportunity to hear from two men who both grew up with a true love of the game of baseball. Commissioner of Baseball, Robert Manfred, at his first Texas engagement as commissioner, and he will later be joined by our President, George W. Bush. And those of you who have been in this market for a while certainly know his passion not only for the game, but for the Texas Rangers as well. As you may know, here at the Bush Center, on this side of the house, we're a policy institute. So when we talk about things, we're usually accustomed to hosting CNN and other such reporters who might be covering news of the day from a very different angle that you are doing. Through our work at the Bush Institute, we cultivate leaders in the Military Initiative Program, women in the Middle East, Burma, and we work on important policy issues, such as strengthening the awareness of our assets here in North America, immigration, education reform, and issues such as human rights in North Korea. But today we're here to talk about baseball, and how does baseball fit into that? Well, on the other side of the house, that's where the public comes every single day to see the legacy of George W. Bush, his 8 years as a president. During that time, he never lost his love of the game. Those of you who know him know he was owner of the Texas Rangers, but what you're going to see at the exhibit, and what we're going to have here in Dallas for 6 months, is an exhibit that's called Baseball, America's Presidents, America's Pastime. It opens tomorrow and will be open every day until October 4. We're so excited to have this really unique exhibit with such a unique perspective. From an owner's point of view, someone who understands the game and understands what it meant to be America's pastime as a former president of the United States. Baseball is, of course, woven so deeply into the American identity. It is who we are. We know it every day and experience in American life, and it even makes it to the Oval Office. This family, the Bush family, played it growing up in West Texas, played it in college, and certainly enjoy watching it today. It's near and dear to their heart. We're excited to have a number of items from President Bush's personal collection on display in the exhibit, along with artifacts from Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum and other presidential libraries. You will see so many stories dating back all the way to George Washington and how folks played with baseballs and bats even back then during the Revolution. I do hope you'll take the opportunity to visit the exhibit and tell your audiences to come see what we have here. We're so thankful to the commissioner who's going to join us today to talk to you about his new role as Commissioner of Baseball, and then we'll join President Bush later to have a discussion with some very special guests before we open the exhibit. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you, for his first time in Texas on official business, Rob Manfred, the 10th Commissioner of Baseball. Thank you. Thank you, sir. All yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to do a brief opening. I can't tell you how many exciting things that I've had an opportunity to do since January 25th, which was my first official day, but none more exciting than this. I am a huge fan of President Bush. I've known him since he owned the Rangers. As a matter of fact, he may not remember this, but I do. I actually was in one of the very first meetings that he attended as an owner of the Rangers, and it's very exciting for me to have an opportunity to be back here and spend some time with him this evening. With that, I'm happy to take questions.
You're excited about being part of an event like this that highlights the presidency and
This is all new enough to me, Richard, that any opportunity to spend time with a president of the United States is very exciting to me. This is particularly meaningful because I have a bit of a personal relationship with President Bush. He is and was one of ours. It is something of a fraternity, as you well know, and once you are a baseball owner, you always are a baseball owner. And I think equally important President Bush's love of the game is really legendary in baseball. I was actually with a major league player today who had heard about the event and said to me, you know, I got to know President Bush a little bit when I played for the Rangers, and it was just so obvious that he's a huge baseball fan. So it's a great combination for me, baseball and a man that I really admire. Yes. Yes, sir.
We're wondering when you anticipate a decision on Josh Hamilton's estate with the disciplinary.
I expect that there will be a decision on Josh before opening day. I should offer a word of explanation about that process. I mean, obviously, with Josh recovering from surgery, it is allowed some time, the luxury of some time in the process, because there was no need to address the issue quickly because he's not going to be on the field either way. But we are working towards a resolution, and I think it will be done by opening day.
What's the timetable on the Pete Rose decision, and do you have any thoughts going into the department?
I really don't have a firm timetable in mind. What I've said is that I'm going to reach out to Mr. Rose and his representatives and talk about the process, and timetable will follow from the discussions that we have about process. I know from my perspective, the Rose matter was one of the few things that's still active in the game that I was not involved in when it originally happened. So I do intend to go back and review the Dowd report thoroughly. I want to review the agreement that was reached with Commissioner Giamatti. I expect that I will talk to Commissioner Vincent, who was involved at that time. And obviously, or not obviously, but I would expect, let me say it that way, that Mr. Rose will want to have an opportunity to come in and chat. So we'll sequence those things and develop a timetable once we have a firm agreement on process.
Develop a timetable in terms of his reinstatement, or just whether the decision?
Timetable for a decision, I mean, obviously I have no predisposition and have expressed none with respect to the issue of whether or not he should be reinstated.
Commissioner, you and President Bush were part on the front lines for the worst of the labor wars, and the Rangers enjoyed great growth under him. Do you have a bond for all the years you go back together in the game?
I do feel, I can't speak for him obviously, but I do feel a bond with President Bush. It was an interesting period of time that he was in the game. We went through the serious debates about revenue sharing. For those of us, I know you were, Richard, and I certainly was around for that. It stressed relationships in the game, probably in a way that no other issue has. By the same token, when we resolved it, it did form a bond within the group. And then, of course, we immediately emerged from those debates and ended up in the strike in 1994, which, again, a very trying time for baseball. And some of the relationships, certainly that I made during that period of time, are some of the strongest that I still have in the game.
There's been a lot of talk about the pace of play going forward. Can you update us on your thought process and what you would like to see happen in the near future?
Well, let me start at the beginning on pace of play. I mean, I think it's important to understand that pace of play was not some issue that we sat around a conference table in New York and decided, gee, you know, let's make pace of play the issue du jour. It really started in the commissioner selection process. I can't tell you the number of times as I was working through the process that I heard from clubs, teams saying, look, we're hearing from our fans about this pace of game issue. We're hearing it. Some clubs had actually done some research that they brought to us. Following up on that after the election, we did some research of our own, and we did find, not surprisingly, when you think about our society, that pace of game was an issue that was of concern to our fans. I have said, and I do believe that issues that affect the play of the game on the field are the ones that are the most difficult for us. And the reason for that's simple. If you make a mistake and you have some unintended consequences, you own that mistake 2,430 times a year. Your fans see it. It's very public. So whenever we have an issue like this, we rely heavily on people like John Sherholtz, Joe Torre, Tony La Russa, who've been on the field, know the game. The other thing we do, and we did it in this case, is we consulted with the MLBPA to make sure we understood where the players were on the topic. We then tested a very aggressive set of changes in the Arizona Fall League. We don't have enough people watching in the Arizona Fall League to be quite as nervous about taking a chance, and we did some very interesting things, a lot of which we liked. We then reconvened and decided that it was important to act this year. We acted with restraint. We picked a couple of initiatives that we thought were important and not too disruptive. And, you know, we've got them out there in the spring. You know, spring training games are different. It's hard to draw kind of interim judgments on them. But the early returns from club people, mostly anecdotal, and from players, I've been out talking to players, are positive, that the game is flowing a little better, and we're hopeful that that continues on into the season and that fans walk away thinking we've been responsive to their concerns. That was a pretty long answer to that question.
Commissioner, can you elaborate a little more on the decision today to start all the regular season games on the closing day at the same time, the calculus behind that decision?
Yes. One of the huge advantages that I've had in the short time I've had this job is that Tony Petitti, who was the chief executive officer at the MLB Network, has come over and become the COO at baseball. Tony has a long production background, did Final Fours for CBS for well over a decade, did the Masters, I think, 10 times. And this idea was really Tony's. What he said was, if you think back, I think it was 2 years ago that we had the great day when Baltimore got in right at the end and Longoria hit the home run in Tampa. And Tony said to me, you know, we don't do anything to encourage that type of last day. I said, well, what can you do? He said, well, we didn't have a last day like that last year because games were at different times. Some of the early games resolved pennant races, and the late games became meaningless. He said the best way to fix it is play them all at the same time. We took it to the owners. It was unanimously approved, and we're hoping we're going to have one really exciting last day of the season this year.
Many of the things that you're dealing with are sort of forward-looking, things like scheduling, pace of play, but there are also things like the Pete Rose story that you've inherited.
Mm-hmm.
Are those inherited issues more difficult to deal with?
I don't think so. You know, when you get a job like this, I think you have to start with the basics. From my perspective, it's the greatest job in the world, and whether you obviously want to look forward and put your own imprint on the game, on the institution. By the same token, I think you have to accept as a fact of life, nobody is able to complete every project on, you know, in this case, January 25th. You know, some of the ones that have been left behind, like Oakland, in terms of their stadium situation, I was involved in before, so I don't, you know, I was involved in trying to solve it, and I'm going to be even more active in trying to get it done going forward.
Commissioner, you said you'd start with basics, so I'm wondering, have you started working on your throwing motion yet for the first time from?
Yeah. You know, that whole throwing out the first pitch thing can be a little nerve-wracking, to tell you the truth. I did one at the Little League World Series. I kind of like that length of pitch, but I don't think I'm going to get away with that.
Did you ever talk to President Bush about his first pitch following 9/11 and what that meant for you?
I'll tell you, I have not talked to him about that. I was actually there that night, and you know, I'm funny, and you shouldn't take this as an indication of how much I love the game, but because of the nature of the jobs that I've had in baseball, I have never been a big memorabilia person. You know, when you deal with players day in and day out, autographs kind of, you lose interest in it or don't have a lot of interest in it. The one baseball autograph that I have and that I will always have is a ball that President Bush signed that night after 9/11. It was a special moment in baseball history, and I know two things. I will never throw a pitch that good, okay, and I hope I never have a night like that night.
As you toured spring training, what's on players' minds? What do they want you to know? What do they ask you about?
The real purpose of those meetings, Richard, is just to give them an opportunity to see me, get a feel for who I am outside of a situation where we're bargaining or there's a problem or I'm trying to convince them of something. Interestingly, I think I've done 8 clubs now. The questions are not common, okay, in general. They've asked about pace of game because that's kind of the initiative of the day. But in terms of other questions, they've been all over the lot. The questions have not been that dissimilar from what press people ask about. And my overall impression of it has been they just want to hear me talk about something that has to do with the game in order to get some feel for who I am and what I'm about. Well, you know, it's an interesting issue. It is occasionally when you bargain an agreement that's that thick, you miss. You know, you just don't get it right in terms of how things are going to work. The new compensation system that everybody worries about was a union proposal that we accepted. And as a result, you know, I think it has caused some dissatisfaction among the player ranks. From our perspective, the system has bifurcated the free agent market in certain years in a way that has allowed some smaller market clubs to participate in the back end of that market. Milwaukee, for example, has been very active in that back end of the market. And when you're trying to promote competitive balance, you can see some pluses in the way that the system's operated. Having said that, I understand that the deal, the trade that was made there didn't work out well from the perspective of the MLBPA, and I can also understand that it's unnerving for players to not know where they're going to play the next year when you get past January 15th or, you know, pick your date. So it probably will be an issue the next time around. Well, let's do the facts, okay? It's always good to start with the facts. You know, Shoeless Joe Jackson was actually on the Hall of Fame ballot, I believe, twice, and was not elected. Having said that, anybody on the permanently ineligible list has a right under the Major League Constitution to apply for reinstatement. I have had communications from fans about Shoeless Joe Jackson. I don't believe I have any formal request pending.
Fans about Rose.
I'm sorry?
Do you hear from fans about Rose?
I do. I hear from fans about Pete Rose, both pro and con, and with pretty significant volume on both sides.
You said when you came out that you're still getting used to things like speaking with presidents and things like that, job. I'm wondering how the transition has been for you. Has it been what you expected? Has it been a little more, a little less? What's it been like?
The transition, from my perspective, has been really seamless. Commissioner Seelig has been very, very cooperative and helpful as I have worked my way through the period of time between the election and when I officially took over. In the time since I've taken over, things have gone much as I expected, with two exceptions. It is very hard to get used to how much attention people pay to what you say. I mean, I give you an example. I made an offhand remark about eliminating defensive shifts. And, you know, for the next week, I got clips and clips and clips, the vast majority of which took the position that I had completely lost my mind. And I really made it sort of as an offhand remark. That's one change. The second thing that has been interesting is the opportunities to be out there and do things that are productive in terms of raising the profile of the game are more numerous than I would have guessed. That you can be out there every day if you can find time around your other activities.
Washington obviously spent a lot of years here. If you want to get back into coaching and managing, is there anything on the MLB side that would prevent him from doing that?
No. There's nothing that would prevent him from doing that. In fact, you know, we try to encourage, have certain procedures in place to encourage the hiring of minority managers and coaches, and obviously someone with Ron's experience would be a good candidate for a position like that.
I wanted to follow up on Lisa's question about Rose, and we've heard from fans. I've heard a lot of people say the Hall of Fame should have everybody in there, and even if it says, this guy was bad because of this, is there any, if you've heard that, you've thought about extending the Hall of Fame to include people like that?
Well, you know, your question raises sort of a larger point that I think is worth appreciating. What I'm responsible for is Major League Baseball's permanent ineligibility list. That is a list that is in place to make sure that if someone has been involved, for example, with gambling, presents arguably a threat to the integrity of the game, that individual cannot be allowed to work in the game. I mean, that's Rule 21, which is kind of the Magna Carta of baseball rules. The Hall of Fame eligibility issue is really a product of the Hall of Fame deciding that that same list will determine whether or not you're eligible to go on the ballot. And so you could conceptually treat those two questions differently, right? I have an obligation to protect the integrity of the play of the game on the field. Whether or not you're eligible for a Hall of Fame is a separate issue.
How do you feel about defensive shifts?
Educated is the one-word answer to that. I have to tell you the truth. Look, I am glad that the tape that came out of was edited in that way because it taught me a couple of things. Number one, how interested people are in potential changes to the game and how much you can learn by having ideas out there and encouraging debate on those ideas. I mean, some of the things that were written are just unbelievable in terms of the quality of the thought that went into them. The second thing I hope people take away is that we are, Major League Baseball, open to change in the game, but change in a way that is thoughtful, been debated publicly, and is undertaken with the understanding that we never want to undermine the history and traditions of the game.
Kind of building off that, I know it's a little controversial, the All-Star game deciding home field advantage. I mean, do you feel that's worked out though? And obviously, since you're kind of new, you guys have an opportunity maybe to go back and look at that as well.
This is one of those controversies that I don't understand, and I really do try to understand it. The All-Star game, if you watch it over a period of years, had changed. Major League Baseball decided that we didn't like where it was headed directionally. We wanted the players more invested in the game, try to make the game as competitive as possible in order to keep the All-Star game as the best All-Star game in professional sports. We made the home field advantage change. Whatever else you say about it, two things are true. It can't be worse than the old rule when we just flip-flop league to league. I mean, it was completely random, right? Number one. Number two, and more importantly, the way that game has been played in recent years has changed. And it's changed in a way that's better for the fans. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.